We do something to talk about here at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center several times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays generally. We're sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which offers innovative and compassionate care and day stays and respite programs. If you'd like to learn more or take a tour of their facilities at the north end of Bainbridge Island, write down this number, 360-689-4314. And give them a call. They'd be glad to talk to you more about their offerings. I also would like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, specifically our neighbors, the Suquamish tribe. And we are grateful for their hospitality, and we honor their heritage, and we look forward to continuing to work with them. Today, we are going to talk with Greg Dronkert, who is the president of Mobility for All, which is a nonprofit here on Bainbridge Island. Mobility for All recently won a $193,000 grant from the Washington State Department of Transportation's Zero Emissions Access Program. Kind of a long name, but I think they named it that so they could call it ZAP, Z-A-P. And so the grant funds will be used to purchase a couple of electric vehicles and install EV chargers at Town Square. And with us today to talk a little bit about this and answer our questions is Greg. So thank you very much, Greg, for joining us.
Thanks, Reed. Hi, friends. Thanks for having me. We chatted with you in the past from our shop here on Bainbridge Island. It might get a little confusing, but we do have a business here, and our business focuses on zero-emission vehicles, advanced vehicle technology, and mobility systems. And I'm going to share my screen with you here, and then I'll keep going. So you should see my screen for the Zero Emission Vehicle Cooperative.
ZEV. ZAP gets
exactly.
ZEV'd.
ZEV gets zapped, right? So a few years ago, a group of us wanted to work on mobility solutions on Bainbridge Island. And we're looking at what was taking place with the Climate Action Committee and with our Sustainable Transportation Task Force. And we thought it would make sense to create a nonprofit. That's what Reed had referred to. The nonprofit is called Mobility for All. It's based here on Bainbridge Island. And it's a group of transportation professionals that are dedicated to operationalizing up and coming mobility solutions. The way that people and goods are moving and will be moving in the future is changing. And so the idea was that the community could have some influence on the solutions that are taking place in our community. One of the concepts that has been shared with Climate Action and with our Sustainable Task Force has been this idea of car sharing, where the community or individuals or a company could own vehicles and share those vehicles and perhaps eliminate a second vehicle in a family or all the vehicles in the family by having vehicles that are shared. Also, the concept of sharing rides, what we always used to think of as hitchhiking in the day or carpooling, that's ride sharing. And that same platform where we would share cars, we could also share rides. So Mobility for All, the local nonprofit, started talking about creating a car share business. And the board decided they didn't want to become a car share business. So a new organization, the one we're going to talk about now, ZEV Co-op, was formed. And ZEV Co-op was formed as a nonprofit community car share. And the idea is that it only uses electric vehicles. And the concept is that this can be used as a model throughout the state of Washington. And from a commercial point of view, car sharing will work commercially in more dense urban areas. But car sharing is not likely to work on a commercial basis in rural and underserved areas. So we have a focus on rural and underserved areas. And so what is it? What is ZEV Co-op? As I mentioned, it's a nonprofit consumer cooperative. It's established to provide zero-emission car sharing in Washington. Its emphasis is on underserved and low-income communities and rural communities. And here's the key differentiator. It's member-owned and democratically controlled. But even though it's member-owned, you do not have to be a member to use it. So it's available to all users. That's what ZEV Co-op is. And the purpose, though, is to provide car sharing solutions that are responsive to the communities that they serve. And that's why we lead with this word, responsive. Every community has different needs. And so the idea is, if we're structured as a co-op, and if our owners are members, then what we do is, the vision is to engage with each community and make sure that the solutions that we're providing are responsive to their needs. All communities, though, want something that's convenient, that's affordable, that's accessible, not just financially, but physically, and then also for any folks that might have disabilities. And then sustainable, not only sustainable from an environmental point of view, that's the concept for only zero emission vehicles, but also sustainable from a financial point of view. And in the end, what we really aspire to do is to have a positive impact on people's lives. So what is car sharing? In simplest terms, it's car rental. It's car rental, but it's tech enabled. It means that you can create your account, you can make your reservation, you can check out your vehicle, you can pay for your vehicle all with your phone or your computer. Or if you don't have those, you can actually go to one of the service centers where the vehicles are and actually get an RFID card, a proximity card, and check the vehicle out with that. The concept is, if you don't have access to technology, you still have access to the vehicles. Car sharing, though, is generally considered to be tech-enabled car rental. We're using electric vehicles. We provide the insurance, the roadside assistance, the maintenance, and also the initial charge to get you underway. Once you're out free roaming, you need to charge the vehicle yourself, but you can bring it back empty and we recharge it. The term station base means that the vehicles leave and return to the place where they started. Unlike if you used any of the car shares that used to be here in Seattle, those were called free floating. You could pick them up, drive them, and leave them and check out and leave them within a zone. But what we're describing is a station-based model where you pick up and return to the same location. That's important for two reasons. The first being you have to charge the vehicles, so they have to get back to a charging station. And the second is it's a much more efficient way to manage the business, because if it's free floating, you have to level and reallocate the vehicles. They tend to clump in a free floating model. One of the other elements of this service is you can reserve the vehicles in advance. So it's not just an impulse use or a spur of the moment use. You could plan in advance. And the other element is having multiple types of vehicles: sedans, pickups, and vans. So it might be that you do an occasional trip to the dump or yard waste. You don't need a pickup truck, but when you want one, it's really beneficial. The co-op's a way to do that. Or you might need to move in the rain, and the van would make a lot of sense. Or you have family and friends in during the holidays, and having a second vehicle to accommodate multiple schedules would make sense, and you'd use a sedan. So we mentioned that it is a membership co-op. So we have members and guests. Guests are users of the vehicles that have not become members. But here again, we want to make sure that the service is available to everybody. And we'll describe that tiered pricing here in a moment. As far as members, there's individual members and group members. So Reed might decide to become an individual member. And as an individual member, he's going to get the benefits that we're looking at here. He's going to get the lowest rates. He's going to get an equity share in the co-op. He's going to get a patronage dividend like REI or PCC, where he'll get 10% of his usage back in the following year to be used. He can make advanced reservations. He has voting rights. He's eligible to run for the board, and he's supporting a meaningful enterprise. He can also add family members too, like think of AAA, where you have a base membership, but then you can add family members. They'll get the same benefits. The current model that we have is 3 additional family members. As we grow and as we get more input from our members, that may change. But currently, an individual can add family members for a low rate. The individual still is the only one that has equity, though, and they're the only one with the voting rights. Similar to that is group. It might be that an apartment complex wants to come in as a group member, and in their membership, they're allowed a certain number of seats. So let's say they're allowed 50 seats. So the apartment complex could be the group member, but it's able to allow X number of users within its constituent base to access the vehicles and get these same benefits. They get the lowest rates. They're going to go ahead and get a patronage dividend. They're going to get advanced reservations. However, the voting rights stay with the group. So there's only one vote for a large group member. And but they're able to nominate someone who would vote on behalf of the group and someone who could run for the board on behalf of the group. Here again, within members, individual and group, we're going to create an income qualified category, which means that we're going to provide a lower, call it a subsidized rate for users that are income qualified. One of our main purposes is to make sure we're providing transportation to all users. And so we want to make sure that it's affordable for anyone who might access it. And then guests don't get any of the benefits that I've described here, and we'll talk about that. And the guests will pay a premium, but they can still access the vehicles. So, for example, this is the current structure we're working with right now. An individual member might come in with an equity fee of $500. That's equity in the co-op. That's equity they can take back out of the co-op when they leave. So it's truly shares. And in this case, the par level might be that they're paying $8 per hour up to 10 hours, and then it maxes out at $80. And you can keep it for another till the end of the day. So that becomes the daily rate. $8 per hour and $80 for a day. An income qualified individual, though, might be half of that. So I'm making an illustration here. These are the rates we think we're going to roll out with. But the idea is that the income qualified member could essentially be half of what a regular member is. On the other hand, if you go and look at the general public, they're paying a higher rate, $12 an hour. With the same trigger after 10 hours, it goes to a day rate. The difference is they pay a monthly fee on top of their use rate. And by them paying a higher rate, we're really creating a way to subsidize the low income rate. So members pay par, visitors pay a higher rate. It allows us to collect a lower rate from our income qualified members. We're governed by a board of directors.
I have a question about that.
Yep. Yes, absolutely.
So what's an hour? If I drive a car for 57 minutes, great. But what if I drive it for 63 minutes?
Yeah, it's an hour. So, I mean, what we're going to do is it's going to take over right at the hour. We're probably not likely to prorate hours. We could get into that. We're certainly not going to do minutes. It could be that we end up doing quarter hours. And but that currently we're treating it an hour is an hour. So once you've gone past that first hour, then you're into your second hour.
So that's a concern, I think, because that produces time anxiety. You're at the store and you want to be back by an hour, but the cashier dawdles and you're 3 minutes late. So it costs you an extra $8 that you don't want to spend. It seems unfair.
Yeah, and the magic about this is it's a consumer cooperative. So as a member, you have a say in how we structure our rates and how much we collect and whether we're making money or not. And so that's the magic of this, is that we are the people that get to decide what we do. So as a member, you'd have a say in that.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the magic, is that we don't have to try to lobby a corporation. It's us, and we decide, well, what works and how much does it cost for us to have a program that goes to the minute, which isn't out of the question. Those exist. The software could allow for that, and you prorate the hour. And if that's what the constituents of the organization want, that's what the organization would do. So currently we're governed, we will always be governed by a board of directors, but this is the current board. Paula Sardinis, who is a representative of the BIPOC community. She's on the board of a Black chamber. She's been involved, many of you might actually know her. She's been involved in various policy issues. She's worked with a number of electeds over the years. She has an organization that looks at policy issues primarily focused on BIPOC communities. Edward Lindo is a social justice attorney at University of Washington. He started an organization called Estelita's Library, which is a social justice library, and he started which is a nonprofit, and then a nonprofit recreation group. It's a cycling group, North Star Cycling. Carrie DiGiulio is a board member for Central Co-op, which is a food co-op in Seattle and Tacoma. Steve Banfield, who was the CEO of Reach Now, which was one of the well-known commercial car shares here in Seattle. And I'm going to come back to that in just one moment. Steve Gutman, who was until recently with Fourth Mobility out of Portland, which is another nonprofit that's involved in operationalizing electric vehicles and different mobility systems, but has a background in car sharing. And then myself, I like to think of myself as a mobility equity advocate. I believe that mobility is a huge equalizer. That if one of the most fundamental things we can do is make sure that people have access to goods and services and work and recreation and other activities. And so that's an area of focus for me. We, of course, have articles of incorporation and bylaws, and we're working on our specific policies and procedures, and still working through our pricing rates right now. And then we have an advisory council. But before we go there, I want to go back to Reach Now and other commercial car shares that were in Seattle. If you remember, about 3 years ago, pre-pandemic, there were there was Lime, there was Car2Go, there was Reach Now. Gig, which is AAA, was coming in, but I don't know if they were quite here 3 years ago. They were just coming in. The long and the short of it is all three of the large commercial operators left Seattle. And they left Seattle because they weren't hitting the margins that they were trying to hit. And there were a number of low-income car share pilots that were about to launch, and they were counting on using the services of these large commercial companies. And when those large commercial companies left, I mean, they literally just pulled out. And I had been a very active user of car share. They left a vacuum. And I remember speaking to some of the folks that were in these low-income car share grant programs, trying to put them together. And my input was, well, let's just create a nonprofit, or let's create a co-op. Let's just do this without the big corporations. And that's how this idea really was born. So to our advisory council, let's see here, excuse me, there we go. So we feel really good about the advisory council as it is now, and we're still adding members, but we have the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, we have Tacoma Power, we have Western Washington Clean Cities, we have ACES, which is Autonomous Connected Electric and Shared Vehicles organization here in Puget Sound. We have Puget Sound Energy. There's Mobility for All. If you'll recall, that's the organization that this was kind of the brainchild of, but didn't want to become a car share company. But Mobility for All is on the advisory committee. We have Seattle Light, and we have Fourth. I mentioned Fourth with Steve Gutman was with Fourth. We're working to get King County Metro Transit. We're working to get Kitsap Transit. We're working to get a number of educational and folks with disabilities organizations we're talking to, trying to get a representative of each of those on our advisory council. And we're having really a high level of engagement from the advisory council, and that has us pretty optimistic about how they're viewing the program. So it might go without saying, but let's talk about the benefits. The benefits are it's an alternative to individually owned vehicles. Could allow us to shed vehicles here in a community like Bainbridge or any community that adopts this. It's an alternative to internal combustion vehicles, right? So we're reducing our carbon footprint. It provides more options within that mobility ecosystem that I was mentioning to you at the beginning as a fascination of mine. This idea of the use and access of different modes. So think if you come off the ferry, and there's the car share. If you usually use the bus, but it's after hours or someone can't pick you up, you have access to the car share as a way to finish your trip. Or if you're a visitor to this community, you have access to that car share to do your exploration of Bainbridge Island. If you take that scenario and we communicate it properly, it's a way to encourage people to leave their vehicles somewhere else and come here on foot, knowing that there's a range of mobility options for them. It's responsive to underserved, low-income and rural communities. In my view, it provides access that might not otherwise be there. If you take an area that might be a transit or mobility desert where there's not a lot of choices, by placing a solution like this in a community like that, you open up opportunities that would not otherwise be available. And to the point a little while ago with Bob is, hey, it's member owned, so members have a say in what we do and how we do it and how we succeed.
So could I just pop in with a little question here about, unless you're going to get to it, I'm wondering, you mentioned a couple of times organizations that you've talked to related to disabilities. You mentioned in some detail the equity, financial equity. You're thinking also about physical access, right?
Yes, now's a great time to talk about it. And if you look at the icon on every slide, it shows multiple types of vehicles: sedans, pickups, and vans. And the idea here is that we want to be able to provide a range of solutions, and we are committed to only electric vehicles. To Reed's question about making sure that the vehicles are accessible to folks with disabilities, there currently are no sedans right now that are electric and configured for ADA. That stuff's coming, but it doesn't exist yet. There's a hybrid out there, but to do the grant that we got, we need to be all electric. So it doesn't exist. Pickups are just coming to market, so it doesn't exist there either. Vans, though, vans do exist that have ADA capabilities. And some of you are aware of the fact that in our shop here, we've been converting vans to electric. An example are the large ProMasters we run for town and country markets, which are essentially a 14-passenger van. The ones we run for town and country are cargo, so they don't have any seats in them except for the driver and a passenger. But to Reed's point, within this grant, 2 of the vehicles that we're putting on the street are ADA vans. And the ADA vans have both a wheelchair lift and seats, and then also some space to carry some light cargo. So groceries, or maybe that van's going to go and run and do some food deliveries for underserved areas of the community, or maybe they're going to go and help get someone to a medical appointment. So what we're doing is we're modifying vans right now so that we can provide that ADA capability. And in the coming months and years, we're going to see more and more manufacturers actually delivering to consumers electric vans that we can then add wheelchair lifts to. And I believe that we'll see more and more opportunities to take conventional, like minivans, and provide ADA capabilities in those as well. Sorry, that was a long answer, but the answer is yes. And the underlying theme here is that we're ahead of the market. There are no commercial electric ADA vehicles out there right now. They have to be converted. So to the topic of traction, when we stood this project up last year, we've been working on it for a while, we did not know about the grants that I'm about to share with you. We just felt we were going to do it. And our first site, we went to Tacoma Power, and I think this is a model. Tacoma Power said they would put in the charging stations for us with a budget they had to put in charging stations. So no cost to the co-op. And we found a site location, a host site in the form of Central Co-op in Tacoma that said, yeah, you can put your vehicles here. We won't charge you. We think this is great. Oh, we understand you're going to put in charging stations. That's great too. So what they got out of it, or they're going to get out of it, are some charging stations and us putting some vehicles in there. And so that was the model. We were just going to launch 2 vehicles there this year right now. But what happened is at the beginning of this year, Washington State put out a grant, the Zero Emission Access Program, the ZAP grant. And we went after that. We figured, hey, we've got our board, we've stood this up, we're working on these things, let's chase the grant. In the end, we ended up landing 7 sites with a total of 11 vehicles, 2 of those being these ADA vans that Reed was asking about. And they're in communities from Port Townsend all the way down to Tacoma. And I'll show you a map of that here in one moment. The other thing that happened is Fourth Mobility, which you've heard me bring up 3 times now. Steve Gutman, who's on our board, Fourth being on our advisory board, and Fourth being a nonprofit advocacy group. They got a federal grant last year to do 70 vehicles around the United States. 10 of those vehicles are allocated to Washington State. And we've entered an agreement with Fourth to operate their 10 vehicles in Washington State under the co-op, which is pretty exciting. So it's got funding. They need to stand it up. We become a viable way for them to meet their grant obligations and their mission in Washington State. And we're able to add those vehicles to our initial footprint. So the 11 under the WashDOT grant and the 10 under the DOE grant, we're looking at 21 vehicles at 12 sites. So let me get to my next slide here.
So question about that.
Yep.
21 over 12 is not a big number, right? That means each site might have 1 or 2 vehicles.
Exactly.
Right? So that's another problem, of course, because it means that unless, let's say it's very popular, that means most of the time I can't get one.
Well, yes. I mean, I would say for a community co-op that's trying to launch, it's a great problem to have if the vehicles are being utilized.
Yes, but it's also a bad marketing problem because
sure,
you know,
I don't want to I'm not going to debate you on this. It's a question of where does the funding come. So, so, so this is a start. And I acknowledge what you're saying, but you got to start somewhere or not do something. I'm a doer, so this is what I'm doing. Now, we could talk about what we could do, and I don't disagree with you, but do you not do based on what you could do?
Well, and there's also the idea that this is a co-op effort. And so the sort of margin that you might need to succeed in a commercial space might be a little different, where you need to have it totally work for most people for them to buy in. Whereas Greg could possibly build this over time because it's got a buy-in. There's obviously a community good idea that you're pitching to a possible member.
Well, the concept.
I love the idea, and it's great, but I think you'd be 10 times more successful if you had just 2 sites or just 3, so that there was a chance when I got up in the morning and needed the car this afternoon that I could actually get one, because it's going to be gone. Somebody took it all day. I may not see it for a week, and I'm going to be disappointed, and I won't bother to call the next time. That's going to happen a lot everywhere.
Well, let's hope so.
You should put 5 cars at 2 sites, and then my chance of getting one is high. I'm going to sing the praises. It's going to be very successful locally, and then you can expand. I think that's much more a good way to do it.
The other
Sure.
thing that might happen, Bob, is that Tacoma could use 8, and Bainbridge really never takes off, and 2 is what we use.
Well, I think this is all great discussion, and I think we should continue this conversation. I'm describing a grant program. The grant had multiple applicants, and so the grant didn't particularly allow. What the grant did was it asked people to put in applications for various sites. So each of these sites that we're looking at were applications from different grant recipients. And what we did, and I'll show you this, is we spoke with these different potential recipients that turned in separate grant applications. So, and what we offered to do, and this is really the key collaboration here, is we said, when you turn in your grant, we'll operate it for you. We'll provide the vehicles, the insurance, the software, the maintenance, the customer service, the roadside assistance, the claims management, everything involved with doing these things. We're going to tie together all these grants. So to Bob's point, Bob, these were all separate grants. We're tying them together with a unified service.
Okay, so you really had no choice but to have all these sites.
Correct. The state put out an application for grants. These were folks that were turning in grants, and then we approached them and said, look, let's collaborate. And so if you get your grant, we're your solution for actually operating it. And while it might have been nice to have, let's say, 5 or 10 vehicles on Bainbridge, and I think we can get there. I think we can get 20 vehicles on Bainbridge. What the state was looking for was grants from various communities, and they were looking at grants that were serving underserved communities. Bainbridge does have an argument for various elements of our community that might be underserved, right, but not normally perceived as a community that has a lot of need.
Understood.
Which I think it does have need, but if you think of Tukwila versus Bainbridge, or Port Townsend versus Bainbridge, Bainbridge really was, I was actually surprised, but thrilled that we prevailed and got the one that Mobility for All turned in the one on Bainbridge. So when Reed introduced me and mentioned that Mobility for All turned in a grant, it did. It worked with the city and it got a grant for 2 cars here on Bainbridge. That was our ask. And the other part of this is the grants were limited to the maximum amount that you could ask for. So you could only ask for $200,000. which essentially is 2 cars. So really, any of these sites were limited by this $200,000 limit, and also this scoring criteria that was asking for evidence or a link to underserved or low income. Now, we were also able to prevail, and we are a rural community, although sometimes we don't think of it, but we are technically a rural community. So the punchline on this is that the way the grants were dispersed and the limits on them were really set by the state. And what I think we did really effectively was tie all these grant applications together in providing a unified platform to deliver those services. The one, though, that we're looking at here on Bainbridge is the one that we, that Mobility for All went after. And we, like everybody else, are going to use the platform of Zev Co-op. So here's the different sites: 2 up in Port Townsend, 1 on Bainbridge, 1 in Seattle, 1 in Tukwila, and 2 down in Tacoma. These are the ones under the ZAP grant. The DOE grant that I mentioned, the other 10 cars, are not shown on here yet because Fourth has not picked its location. Those are going to probably go to housing authority locations over here in Seattle. So while I do embrace the point that, oh, it would be nicer to have more cars on Bainbridge, given this strategy, if you are in any one of these communities and you're a member of the co-op, you can use any of these vehicles in these locations and the ones that are not on here yet. And as the co-op grows and there's more and more vehicles in the ecosystem, then of course you have access to them. And one of the ways that a member guards their usage of the vehicle is they get advanced reservations. And so a guest user can't come and take a car out from underneath you if you've made a reservation. But yes, you're right. If it's wildly popular on Bainbridge, we're going to need more cars quickly, which would be a great problem for us to have.
So another question about if I do keep the car for my 1 hour for 3 hours, what happens to the guy with the next reservation?
Well, so that's why you check them out for a specific period of time.
I know, but there's nothing to force me to return it on time.
A penalty.
Okay.
I mean, it's a co-op. So the point is, as members, we have to decide how cooperative we want to be.
But then what about charging? Like if I run the thing down pretty far, you're going to need to charge it, I'm assuming level 2, for many hours.
Exactly. So we're going to build dwell time in there for charging. And then we will also have access to fast chargers, which is a whole different conversation, but through a different grant program, maybe I'll come back and talk about, we've just got 4 fast chargers that will be installed at Town and Country here on Bainbridge and 4 up in Paulsbo. So here pretty soon on Bainbridge Island and Paulsbo, we'll have the ability to DC fast. Tacoma has multiple locations. Seattle has multiple fast charging locations. So
when is that going to happen?
It's going to happen within the year, with not this calendar year, but within the year, before it by June next year.
Great.
That was called the ZVIP grant through WashDOT, and was another project we were involved in, but we're really excited about that as well.
Great, thanks.
So I'm hoping that we might be able to, if anybody else has any questions, besides Bob, I want to make sure we get a chance to hear from them as well before we're done. So go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I'll finish up. So before we knew about these grants, our plan was 24 cars in 24 months. And we're planning to do that pretty lean and mean, right? We felt that was not a very aggressive growth strategy. But I've already said with these grants now, there's 21 vehicles that could come online in the next 6 months. So we're almost at our 2-year goal, certainly within the first year. And so our initial plan was 24 and 24. And then our goal beyond that was to expand to, you can see, 50, 100, and 250 cars by 2027. And by the time the co-op gets to that level, then I think we really are achieving that kind of density of service where people wouldn't be disappointed by missing their vehicles. But it's a growth plan. And what I'm describing to you is I believe we're well on our way. And our vision is to improve access for all users, to get more people using fewer vehicles, to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles, to really grow in response to the needs of the specific communities that are being served. And then ideally, we would expand throughout the region. So I think if we're successful in Washington, 10 years from now, we could have high density in Oregon and Idaho. And ultimately, the goal here is to have a positive impact on people's lives. And the next steps right now, that what we're focusing on right now are these two grants, the ZAP and the AMP grants. These are both pilot projects, so we need to successfully deliver the pilots. Once we know that we're up and doing that, then we're going to start doing a membership drive. But we're not really, I'm not pitching you to join as members, because when we roll these things out initially, we're just going to let everybody access them. We're just going to try to get people in the vehicles because the program's funded, get people in the vehicles and let them experience it. And then if they believe in it, then we're going to try to bring them on as members. Then we'll do a group membership drive, and we're going to continue to build out our advisory council. And that's where we're at. I appreciate your interest in the project. I'm excited that we're going to have two of them here on Bainbridge. Ultimately, on Bainbridge, I would envision we'd have them at the ferry terminal. Town and Country has already said they'd add some at Town and Country. We could have them at, for example, the senior center, library, Coppertop, Linwood, Rolling Bay, put them in our town centers. I could easily see 20 vehicles at what we might think of as mobility hubs or intersections on Bainbridge. And I could see that within the next 3 years. And if you just look at what we have, if we could get 1,000 members on Bainbridge Island, that's $500,000, regardless of what's going on with grants, that we as a co-op, as a nonprofit, could allocate as we see fit in this community. So I think we could do a lot if we get strong local support.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there are questions that other folks besides Bob might have. I want to make sure you get a chance to get in here. And I'll just ask about the current, what you're calling the pilot or the grant for Bainbridge specifically. Currently, it's looking at space or spaces at outside City Hall, right? In the town square area there?
Exactly. They call that Town Square. We've named the project Town Square Share. It includes 2 vehicles, 4 slots. 2 of those slots will provide just level 2 charging for anybody in the public, and 2 of those slots are dedicated for the car share. And the current project schedule shows that going into service January of 2023.
So surprisingly soon.
We're going to keep at it.
And what do you expect will be the vehicles that would be available on Bainbridge, given that you have just a couple
those first
spots?
2, yeah, those first 2 are going to be both EVUs. That's a, that's a mid price range, high utility, next generation Bolt that's available. And we're trying to, under the grant, standardize the sedans. So those are the sedans we're using. And then the vans that we're using are, one's going to be a Ram ProMaster that we convert. And then the other one is we're going to see if we can get a Ford E-Transit, which is a new manufactured van. And then we would put the seats and everything inside that and upfit that to a ADA van.
And so are you thinking that the vehicles that would be available in the various locations that you're helping to run might vary over time? Or would there be some assurance that I might be able to try out one of those vehicles on Bainbridge? Maybe not in January of 2023, but.
So we could move them, but under the grant, we've generally, each grantee had selected what they felt they needed in their community. And so the ADA vans, one is going to Seattle to Estelitas Library, and the other one is going to Tukwila to Tabor 100, which is a Black Chamber of Commerce, a business park that has BIPOC businesses. And they got one sedan, and then they got one ADA van coming in at that site. We're really trying to test how the ADA vans work. Now, one other point that I didn't touch on is there's 2 more rounds of state funding that can go towards this. We'll know in March. And so the funding that we got for this has been approved by the legislature, but has not yet been appropriated. Okay, so the idea is the legislature wanted this to go on for 3 budget cycles, and but we're in the first of those 3, and the WashDOT is being very careful about saying that don't count on the money, but it should be there.
It's one of
So
those
it could be-
unfunded mandates we've heard about.
Well, it is kind of an unfunded mandate, but I believe that there's enough focus on sustainability, and there's enough political will that a project like this will be funded.
Great. So I'm gonna let you, Bob, do you have a question, since you've
Yeah, I wonder if
obviously
you could
engaged on
send
this?
out Greg's contact information for further conversations.
Absolutely. It'll be in the information at the bottom of the YouTube video. And because I have your email address, I'm happy to send a link to this video to you. And anybody else who is on this call who would like a copy of the video, you can email me at reed, R-E-E-D, at biseniorcenter.org, or just watch our YouTube channel, because we'll be posting this video there at youtube.com/biseniorcenter.
Well, thank you everybody for your interest. I'm happy to send the deck out as well. And we will be focusing pretty heavily on standing the sites up under the grant. But then once we get the grant operationalized, then we're going to go out and do, if you will, a listening tour and try to understand what each different community group might be looking for with regard to the needs of this community.
Great. We'd love to have you come to the Senior Center.
And please do send out the deck. I want to share it at GROW, because we have a big One Planet effort here with transportation being cause number 1. And we're talking about even having our own shared electric vehicle, but it might not be necessary now. Instead, we might be able to contribute to yours.
Well, it would be, I love that. And it's ours. I'm trying to be, even though I am the face of this, I'm really trying to remind everybody that I'm just trying to make it happen. And I am just what would just be one vote, and we all get to decide the destiny of it. But yes, GROW, I'm glad you brought that up. GROW is a perfect example. GROW could be a group member. It could have a certain number of seats for its constituents there at GROW, and it could cite vehicles right there. It could have 2 or 4 vehicles, but let's say 2, and they're on a reservation system, and they would be available to everybody, but they could be hosted right there at GROW, which kind of gives you preferential access to them. But certainly the reservation system allows you to lock them up when you know you want them.
Right. Of course, then the problem is charging at all these extra sites. Right?
No doubt.
Yeah.
Every site needs a level 2 charger, which I didn't touch on. Every one of those sites on the map that I showed you has charging and vehicles. So part of what we're doing right now is getting all the charging in, and then we'll get all the vehicles, and then we'll get working.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Greg, for taking the time to walk this through. We really appreciate it. I'm interested in seeing how it grows.
My pleasure, and I am just one of many. The idea here is it's kind of mobility by the people is the concept, that we can take command.
Mobility for all, you could even say.
That is the idea.